Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evenings with an Author at the American Library in Paris. My name is Emily Biggs. I'm the programs manager here at the library. Is anyone visiting for the first time today? Okay, I see some hands, so you get my spiel. Excellent. We are the largest English language lending library on the European continent. We've been in operation for over 100 years, and over that time we've been the intellectual home to many figures who will be discussed tonight, such as Anais Nin, Janet Flanner, and figures that we will not be discussing, such as Hemingway, and many Steinbeck, many others. We are a living cultural center as well, so we host events like the one you are about to witness 2 to 3 times per week, engaging authors, artists, filmmakers, journalists about literature, current events, and more. And tonight, it is such a pleasure to be welcoming this brilliant bunch of women as we discuss impressions from Paris, women and art in interwar France. This discussion will be led by the brilliant Sylvie Blum, who is the editor of this brilliant book, which you see right in front of us. And so we have Sylvie Blum. We have as well Clara Oropeza, Sherry Buckborough, and Samia Spencer joining us tonight in person. And we have some Zoom participants as well, and they're trapped inside that tiny little camera right there. So hello, Zoom audience. Thank you for joining us. Hello, Zoom panelists. Thank you for joining us. We've got lots to get through in 45 minutes, after which point we will turn to the audience, both in person and on Zoom, for questions. So I will stop talking and leave it to the brilliant ladies right in front of me. Thank you so much for joining us. Can we have a round of applause, please?
Thank you so much, Emma. I want to thank the library, Emma Schumann and Emily Biggs, for helping make this event happen and come to life. I will first of all let all the speakers today introduce themselves with their own words, and then I'll talk a little bit about the anthology and how it came about. So that will probably require the Zoom people to also introduce themselves. We're supposed to be 5 here and 2 on Zoom, but we're still waiting for one more person. It's possible that she, being Denzel Senatiempo, is being delayed somewhere crossing Paris. I don't know. Okay, so in that order, I think we'll start with Clara. Can you introduce yourself, and then I'll ask questions after all the introductions are done, so it's not just the question-answer session.
So, hi everyone, I'm Clara Oropesa, and I'm an English faculty at Santa Barbara City College, and I'm also an Int scholar, and I'm very excited to be here tonight.
Okay, hello. I'm Sherry Buckborough, and I have recently retired, 5 years ago, from University of Hartford in Hartford, Connecticut, where I taught for a good long time. And I'm talking tonight on Sonia Delaunay, and I have been working on Sonia Delaunay for probably 50 years. I actually met her a couple of times while she was still alive, so that's enough of an introduction. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Samia Spencer. I'm a professor emerita at Auburn University, and I'm happy to be here. I was very happy to have the opportunity to work on the university, the Sorbonne, particularly in the early 20th century. I had worked on Dorea Shafi for a while, on some of her work and her life, but this gave me the opportunity to focus on life at the Sorbonne in the early 20th century, between the 2 wars, actually, and make interesting discovery for me.
Thank you. Can we have Kathy Montfort or Catherine Montfort and Kathy Portuguese? Could you speak and introduce yourself briefly?
Okay, I'm Catherine Montfort. I'm professor of French at Santa Clara University in California. So I'm far away from you today, but very close considering the book. I have been interested in quite a few women writers, starting with Madame de Sévigné long time ago, and finally got to the 20th century because it's so alive thanks to books like Impression de Paris.
Thank you. And Kathy?
Greetings to everyone. I'm Catherine Portuguese. Thank you especially to Sylvie for the privilege of being included here. I wish I could be with you in person. I want to thank my dear friends and fellow former graduate students, Mary Lawrence Test and Myrna Bell Rochester, through whom I met first Françoise Gillot, thanks to our former professor, the distinguished writer Dominique de Santi. And it's been very exciting to know and be able to write about Françoise Gillot. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I think we have a new arrival. So I'll let Denzel. Senatiampo, nice to greet you for the first time.
Yes, thank you. I took the wrong metro line this evening. I mean, I took the right one, but it was the wrong choice because it was en dépannage électrique. Yes, my name is Denzel Senatiampo. It's a long name. I was previously at the University of Washington. I just barely switched over to Edmonds College, and I research women authors and artists of the interwar period.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I want to briefly recap on how this book came about. This is an anthology. I sent a call for papers and essays regarding women artists and writers in the interwar period, which for me is between both world wars, in the 1920s all the way to the 1940s. I received some responses. I also had to seek out more people because I thought some fields were not covered. This project lasted about 4 years. It started really in 2019, where I had a session I organized at the Modern Language Association in Seattle, Washington. This was a great symposium and panel. And Catherine Montfort and Kathy Portuguese are the ones who were with me on that panel. And so we moved on. I was basically approached by a press, which is Vernon Press, a very interesting press devoted to the humanities, and worked with them to complete this project. I'm very much interested in the period, the interwar period, and I'm a mostly film and culture scholar dealing with 1930s, the 1930s period, which, in my opinion, is never far from here. We're about 100 years after the 1920s and 1930s, so it's 100 years is not that long. So I'm very happy, and I want to take the opportunity to thank my collaborators who are present or absent or on Zoom today. This is the first time we're actually getting together to celebrate our work, and I really am very happy of this opportunity. And there's somebody I want to also thank who is right next to me. It's Clara, who's been kind of gently pushing me forward for years now, and I think this is finally coming true. So some of the work that is covered here basically deals with, I'm going to name the people who are included in the book. I'm talking about artists and scholars, artists, writers, and journalists. There's Josephine Baker, Colette, Lucie de la Rue Mardrus, and I might forget, obviously, Doria Shafik, Anaïs Nin, Sonia Delaunay, and Irène Nemirovsky. Did I forget anything? Anyone? If I
Nemirovsky.
And Janet Flanner.
Janet Flanner,
who I deal with.
Françoise Gillot.
And Françoise Gillot, I'm very sorry, Kathy. So, end of the day, long week.
Nemirovsky, Irene Nemirovsky.
Yes, I did mention her. So.
Oh, okay, didn't hear it.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So the field is rich, and I don't pretend to have put together the ultimate anthology on all these women. In fact, the list is so long, and I want to think of all the women artists and writers who are not recognized today still, who are in the shadow of the great other people who are mostly recognized. So when I am in Paris, I think a lot about, for instance, Gertrude Stein, Alice B. Toklas, and Janet Flanner. But there are other people who are obviously not at the forefront. And I'm happy that we included all the people we have, and it seems to be going in full circle. So having said that, this is the order that we're going to go with, and it's going to be very short because we have a question and answer at the end. So we have 45 minutes altogether. I'm going to start with Clara, and then Samia, Sherry, Denzel, and Kathy Portuguese, and Catherine Montfort, and I will finish with myself and on Janet Flanner. So my first question will be to Clara about your contribution, which is about Anais Nin and how you envisage or how you see your work in this particular anthology regarding Nin and Nin in Paris mostly.
So, the title... Oh, that's mute. Sorry. Okay, there. Thank you. So the title of my essay is A Vivacious Literary Life of Paris, and I think a good place to start is by giving some context to that title. And it comes from a quote that Nin stated in an interview, and I'd like to quote her directly, where she says, "Now, the reality was that the first book I wrote then connected me with a vivacious literary life of Paris. It was the writing which was the way out." And so my piece really encircles the way that it's in Paris that Nin learned how that writing would be a way to write herself out of the cultural constructs of the time for women. And so Nin was born in Neuilly in 1903 to a Danish-Cuban mother and a Spanish-Cuban father. She leaves Paris initially at the onset of World War I with her mother and her two siblings. At that point, they're going away with as on their own because the father has abandoned the family by that time to pursue his career as a musician. Because the males at the time got to pursue their art, whereas for the women it was not so easy. So Nin's mother takes the children to New York, and then Nin will come back to Paris in 1924. A 21-year-old Nin is back in Paris at that point with her then husband Hugo and her brother Joaquin Jr. and their mother. And the pretext to come back to Paris at the time is because Joaquin Jr. is going to go to music conservatory. And so in order to keep the family together, Nin and everybody comes back to Paris. And Paris really births Nin at the time because it becomes a place where she learns to develop her own creative strategies and her own literary credo that will really inform her for the rest of her life. So when she comes back to Paris initially, she's got a lot of anxiety and memories about her father, whom she hasn't seen by now for over 10 years. But it's in Paris that she publishes her first book in 1932, and her first book is on D.H. Lawrence, and it's a critical analysis of D.H. Lawrence's work. And Lawrence has just died 2 years prior. So I always thought it was interesting that amidst all the female artists at the time that Nin finds a literary father, and it was in Lawrence that she found the creative or the feminine sensitivity that she was so drawn to. But of course, she was in love with a lot of these writers. Colette, for example, in Volume 2 of her diary, she reflects on her, ruminates on her adoration for Colette that was so deep. But she had this shyness about approaching Colette because in Colette's Jardinel de Claudine, Colette has a character that's the most despised character, and her name is Anaïs. So Nin was shy about this negative association, so she never approaches Colette. But nonetheless, her book, her 1932 book on Lawrence, does draw the attention of Henry Miller, hence connecting her to the vivacious literary life of Paris at the time. So my essay focuses on the intersections that are happening in Nin's world at the time that really helped to make her the writer that she became. And that was the surrealism, modernism, and the emerging psychological theories at the time that were so important to her. In surrealism, she has the whole notion of automatic writing and really following kind of the unconscious type of writing. And then modernism, of course, was about breaking rules and creating things anew and questioning institutions. And one of the institutions that Nin would have questioned deeply would be like Catholicism and its negative impact and oppressive impacts on women. And then, of course, she's reading the emerging psychological theories of the time. The work of C.G. Jung becomes incredibly important to her at the time. The notion of using dreams as a kind of backdrop for settings is a big thing in her novels at the time. Jung's notion of proceed from the dream outward becomes a really important thing for Nin at the time. Also, myth becomes an important thing for her to work with at the time, and that means that using the personal as a pretext to the collective by referring to different myths and mythological kind of things and ideas. So all of those things are intersecting for Nin in Paris at the time, and so my piece really emphasizes how is it that Paris was really the place that allowed her to kind of access all of this creative and cultural kind of material, which was again so rich. So then my essay ends by evoking one of my favorite images of Nin, and that is that in 1939, when Paris is preparing for the war, and the river police comes to the Seine, and they issue tickets to all the boats have to leave the Seine because Nin lived on a houseboat. They all have to leave the Seine, and Nin hires towing to tow her boat to a salvage yard in Neuilly, which is where she was born. And there's Nin on the deck of her boat, bailing water out of the deck so that her boat won't sink. And so I always thought of it as an image. I thought of it as an image that really kind of exemplified the autonomy with which Nin was now leaving Paris with, that she gained in Paris, and the sense of strength as herself standing there on the deck of her boat. And so Nin will leave Paris at that point, goes back to the U.S., and she'll never return to Paris, although Paris will remain an incredibly fond place have a fond place in her heart, but she will never reside in Paris again. So that is the essence of my contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's very rich. Thank you. So I forgot, obviously, in my introduction to mention that there is always a distinction made by mostly American historians about left bank and right bank. But I like the fact that Nin at some point ended up in the middle on a boat. Yeah. And that's a beautiful image to see her, right before the war.
Yeah, and I think it just suggests how she really did belong to so many of the worlds at the time, not just on the left bank and with the female writers, but also the major male literati of the time.
So moving on away from the river, we're going to move to Samia, and I was going to ask you a question, but you may want to go your own way about describing and telling us more about Doria Shafik, because I really discovered somebody who needs to be really more discovered today. So that's your contribution.
Right. Well, for most of my academic life, I focused on the 18th century. So, je suis 18iste de formation. But then recently, I discovered the Egyptian feminist movement, and which was absolutely a field that's fascinating, that's fantastic, and that really started the movement of feminism in the entire Muslim world, the Arab world, in Egypt in the early 20th century. The person who was best known as a feminist who started that movement was Huda Sha'rawi, whose name is well known in Egypt, outside of Egypt, and she's really in a number of books about the feminist Arab movement. So she's the grande dame of Egyptian feminism. But then she died fairly soon, 1947, And then the person who took over after she died, the other grande dame of Egyptian feminism, is Doria Shafi, whom I met as a child with my mother when she was visiting a friend. And then came this lady. I heard my mother and her friend mention that this lady was really very important, but I didn't know much about it. I had seen her name in elections and things like that, but again, I was really, really very young, and I don't remember much except her name. Well, a few years ago, I discovered her and was fascinated, and I wrote mostly about her life because, again, she's not known. Her name was completely forgotten for a number of years because she was so outspoken and she was so straightforward in what she said and did that Nasser put her under house arrest, and it was totally forbidden that her name be mentioned anywhere. So for 18 years, she was actually maybe a few less because Nasser put her under house arrest. But when Sadat came to power, he sort of freed her, but she decided to remain out of the limelight and basically just within her family. Doria Shafi, was a personality that toured the world. She was she was a star. She was respected. She toured the world to speak about Egyptian women, modern women. She wrote and published poetry. She was a journalist. She was a poet. Her poetry was published in French. And she had two magazines, one in French, La Femme Moderne, and she had another one. This was the magazine that was in French, was basically geared toward the upper class in Egypt and the entire world, because she wanted to project a different image from the standard prejudice, the image of Muslim women being, behind the others, and that was not really true at that point. And then she published another journal, magazine in Arabic, The Daughter of the Nile, for the Egyptian people to encourage women to be, to learn more about their rights and so on and so forth. She was also a political activist who just did amazing things for women in Egypt. She organized 9 classes for women to teach them how to read, because the level of literacy was quite low at that time. Not just in Egypt, but everywhere else. I discovered when I was doing my work on the the French university, the Sorbonne, for example. I found out that in the early 20th century, the number or the proportion of French women who had baccalaureate was 0.04%. So that women in the Middle East were not very well educated or not literate was not a surprise. But anyway, so her action was such that she was so open-minded, so liberal in her work, in her interpretation. She's like just about all Egyptians. She was very religious, but her religion was very open. She was a Muslim, grew up in a Muslim family, but her interpretation of Islam was that of the liberal Islam of the early 20th century. But she was also very impressed by her professors at the Sorbonne. And I found out, as I was asked to write about Doria Shafi as a student, which I really didn't know much about, but then was fascinated to discover the environment and the professors who inspired her. And it so happened that she was born the same year as one of the best-known French feminists. They were born the same year. Guess what the year was? Guess who that person was? Okay, I'll give you the year. Try to think who that French feminist was. Probably the best known of all times. Year was 1908. That was Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir. They studied at the Sorbonne at the same time. They had the same professors. And the influence, I was really fascinated to learn who these professors were. They taught Simone de Beauvoir. Not only did they teach Doria Shafi, but they also directed her doctoral thesis. So they had more influence on her, and she was much more impressed by them than Simone de Beauvoir was, since Simone de Beauvoir did not receive a doctorate from the Sorbonne. So anyway, these professors were so involved. They are the ones who had created the League of the Rights of Men. They had mostly come from Eastern Europe, some of them, most of them. They were very involved, and in fact, the wife of one of them was one of the cabinet members in the 1936 cabinet that included women. Women served in the cabinet at the time when French women, served in the cabinet at the time when they didn't have the right to vote. So anyway, discovering this whole time and this whole environment, we all know about the Paris between the two World Wars. It was Paris between the two wars was a movable feast. I didn't think there was anything more to discover about that period, but I discovered the hidden part of that movable beast, and I was just really appreciative that Sylvie asked me to work on something that I didn't know, and was really thrilled to discover. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samia, and I'm glad I kind of pressured you. Okay, so we're moving to Sherry. I have a pointed question for you regarding your chapter, which is entitled Sonia Delaunay's Joyful Encounters. Can you tell us a little bit more about what these joyful encounters that you refer to in your title are? And what do they have to do with Sonia Delaunay's desire to create new beings for the modern world?
I would be happy. Oops. Okay. Thank you. I would be happy to, but I can't use images here tonight, which is a shame. So I'd like to ask how many of you know the work of Sonia Delaunay? Okay. Would somebody please like to describe what it's about? What it looks like? At all? Colorful. It's colorful. Thank you. Absolutely. Anybody else? Geometry. Yes, it's geometric usually and very abstract. More. A lot of circles, right? Absolutely. Anybody else? Well, for those of you who don't know Sonia Delaunay, a real quick synopsis. She was born in 1885 in the Ukraine, actually. And into a working class Jewish family, but her uncle had become a lawyer and married into the Sachs banking family in St. Petersburg, and they couldn't have children, so they asked to more or less adopt her. So she went from a small town in the Ukraine to St. Petersburg, where she lived in really absolute luxury, until she decided that she, for several reasons, she she didn't like the restrictions of that life. And she went to Germany for her initial art training. She was already determined she was going to be an artist. And there she learned about Impressionism and Post-Impressionism and decided that her next step would be Paris, certainly. And so she convinced her parents, or pseudo-parents, aunt and uncle, to let her go to Paris. And she was in 2 or 3 of the academy that accepted women. And then they put her under pressure to move back to Russia because it was time for her to get married and have children and be a good bourgeois woman, but she didn't want to do it all. So she figured out how to establish a marriage, a mariage blanc, with a gallery owner by the name of Wilhelm Oeder, who was carrying people like Picasso and Braque and really all of the major avant-garde. And that worked fine until she met through him Robert Delaunay, who was a young avant-garde artist, and they fell in love. And before she knew it, having thought she couldn't get pregnant, she was pregnant. So there was a big rush to dissolve one marriage and start another one, and then set up a new life in the apartment that they bought, which was very close to the river, on the left bank at first. Anyhow, so that's just the beginning. But the art that the couple produced in unison after that was really a color that's an art that is known by its dedication to color, and particularly to the simultaneous contrasts of color, which Robert used for the most part in painting and explored it theoretically, but Sonia applied this concept, which they called simultanism, that's the way it's referred to in English, to all aspects of life. And in the 1920s and 1930s, Sonia was really best known as a textile and fashion designer, and I can see that you've seen some of her textiles and fashions, and my article concentrates primarily on her fashion designs, which were made from fabric that she designed in abstract forms with usually bright, sometimes very subtle, contrasting colors. And from here, I'm going to read to you because it's the only way I can keep it at all concise. Her fashion career actually began with a dress covered in patchwork made in the summer of 1913 before the First World War, and it was made to wear to the risque dance club, which still exists as a cafe, the Bal Boulier, which was frequented by the artistic avant-garde and lots of students from the Sorbonne. The dress's complex design featured concentric circles of brightly contrasting colors that correlated to the contemporaneous paintings of her husband, Robert. Its fashionable cut was made for dancing the tango. It was what was called a tango dress, though Sonia herself didn't dance. The dress danced for her, or the colors danced for her as she saw it. Her friend, the poet Blaise Cendrars, wrote a poem about the dress entitled, quote, "On the dress she has a body," unquote. The idea was that the woman wearing the dress became a new being, a new entity, one well-suited to the changing modern world. It was one artistic step toward fulfilling the Nietzschean goal of creating a new form of humanity that Nietzsche promoted the concept of the artist genius as the agent to complete this task of creating a new humanity. And his ideas were, of course, fully accepted by the artistic avant-garde. I'm so sorry, okay. But Delaunay's favorite philosopher throughout her life was actually Baruch Spinoza, seen by many today as being a precursor for Nietzsche. Philosopher Simon O'Sullivan has recently untangled Spinozian theory by concentrating on what he calls joyful encounters, the meeting of two bodies meaning anything from human beings to inanimate objects or substances, bodies that are mutually enhanced by coming together. Delaunay sought joyful encounters throughout her life, in her marriage to an artist of a like mind, and in the numerous collaborations that she was part of with other creative people. She also sought them in the meeting of colors, seeking contrasts that brought forth the maximum excitement and harmony. And she extended this approach to her fashion designs, working on commission, getting to know the body types, the modes of movement, and the personalities of her clients before proposing particular colors and particular designs. The results were fashions that, in her mind, transformed the body with the joyful encounters of color and color, fabric and form and woman, all achieving maximum vitality. A vitality in keeping with the speed and excitement of modern life. Thank you.
Thank you. So I was wondering where that house was before. So if it's on the left bank, I thought it was Boulevard Malesherbes, but that was another.
Boulevard Malesherbes is where they moved. Thank you. I should have said that. Where they moved after they came back after the war. Okay. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So, there, I mean, that was definitely a move from one place to the other, and it was totally because that was now the fashion district.
Right.
Yeah, and she set up her studio there.
Yes. All right. That was Maison Sonia or something like that, right?
Maison Sonia.
Okay, another fascinating occurrence. So, in this, I noticed working on this book, on this anthology, that sometimes we would always go back to fashion.
Yeah.
In one way or another. So Denzel Senatiempo wrote on Colette, but her way in was, and I'm going to give you the title of her chapter, which is chapter 2, Lola the Greyhound, Animalistic Femininity and Colette's Aversion to Flapper Fashion. I was very intrigued by this title, and we worked together. It was very interesting to see the result. So can you address this?
Is this on? Oh, yes, thank you. I was really excited when Sylvie invited us to collaborate on this because I had something in mind. I had been in the archives and I had noticed, I'd been researching Colette for a while. I'm a fashion studies scholar. And of course, Colette, as many of you know, she's famous for Claudine around the turn of the century, the Peter Pan collars, the schoolgirl collars, the short hair, the youthfulness. A lot of the publicity photos for that book were taken when she was nearly 30, but they dress her in a very youthful way. It's kind of a harbinger of later works, right, like Lolita by Nabokov. There's a lot of problematic associations, but I saw this quote in the archives where she was, I believe actually I was reading Journey for myself, and she was comparing flappers to greyhounds. And I thought, that's odd. Why would she do that? And then I realized that, you know, her animal metaphors that she's famous for, as I went through, a lot of them were classed into two categories. When she wanted to insult somebody, she would compare them to a dog. And when she wanted to compliment them, it was typically a cat or a sphinx, which has cat associations. And I thought, okay, something is going on here. I guess one place to start is that, you know, Claudine, those novels and that publicity campaign, it was such a big deal. It was the first publicity campaign was around 1902, 1903 for those books. And Willy, who was Colette's much older, more rakish, and let's just say domestically abusive in many ways husband, was a marketing genius. He successfully created a whole series of commercialized products. There were Claudine collars that you could buy and attach to your outfits. There was Claudine makeup. There was Claudine everything. One of the things that he did was he hired the famous stage actress Polaire, and he dressed her identically to Colette as two different Claudines, so like little twins, and he walked them around Paris. I found in Polaire's autobiography, she says, he walked us around like a couple of greyhounds. And I thought, here's the greyhound again. I need to figure this out. Why is Colette calling in the 1920s flappers greyhounds who are running too quickly towards the horizon of modernity? That doesn't sound very flattering. And why is Paulaire saying Willie treated us like a couple of greyhounds that he was showing off in matching clothes? So I did some research, and the greyhound has the association with nobility, right? These very purebred dogs that were bred to run beside the carriages of nobles and aristocrats. They were aristocratic dogs. I also found in the work of Kathleen Keat and many others an association between women who had been domesticated by their husbands and dogs who had been domesticated by their husbands. And then I realized that in many of the Claudine postcards, Toby Chien, the dog who's famously Colette and Willie's dog, he's wearing a Claudine collar. He's a black dog. He's wearing a white collar. She's in black. She's wearing a white collar. And Willie is often in the middle with one on either side. I also found manuals from the late 1800s about how a bourgeois woman and the family dog should have matching or coordinating outfits in some capacity. So there's this tradition, I guess. And actually today in the metro, I keep coming back to the metro, but I saw an ad for Perrier, and it had a woman wearing sunglasses and headscarf, and on the other side of the billboard facing her was a very sophisticated-looking dog wearing the same outfit. And the association was, look, they match. So when Colette writes that flappers are greyhounds, she's not paying them a compliment. She's saying, there's essentially this long history in Western philosophy of viewing dogs in Western Europe, right, as cultivated animals. There's many different breeds of dog. There are many, many different ways that humankind, and especially men, right, mankind, is considered to have, these breeds are malleable. We've created new breeds of dog. Cats are not cooperative like that. Cats will not let you train them. You can't get such variety as the Chihuahua versus the French Bulldog versus the Great Dane. Cats look more like themselves, and they don't cooperate in the same way that dogs do. And so there's this long history of viewing problematic women as more cat-like and cooperative or well-civilized women as dog-like. So in La Vagabonde, Colette writes that she is dancing, right? She had this long history as a vaudeville dancer and performer, and she took off her corset before it was popular to do so. She writes that she is dancing like a feline beast who springs, then recoils, a sphinx. And she says, is not the mere swaying of my back, free from any constraint, an insult to those bodies of the women in her audience who are cramped by long corsets, enfeebled by fashion? And she says they have muzzles, which is a very dog-like thing to say. So I found that Josephine Donovan and Carol Adams, feminist philosophers, talk a lot about the concept of somatophobia, or hatred for the body, or fear of the body, that they view as inherent to a lot of Western culture and philosophy, where there's this dualism happening, right? Like men are considered to be active civilization builders, logical, rational, and women are bodies. Women are corporeal. Women are problematically sensual. Women are in opposition to reason. As late as 1929, Freud writes that women are naturally in opposition to civilization. And people were just like, oh, yes, everyone knows this. But Colette never fully accepts this concept. She is always, as we know, using animal metaphors positively and comparing herself to an animal. A lot of this I attribute to her mother, Sido, right, who raised her in this sort of Garden of Eden environment. We only know Sido through really Colette's recollection, but Colette writes that her mother viewed her father with suspicion and said to him one time, "You're so human." It was sort of like, what's your deal? You're so human. And that she referred to herself and Colette as the women of the family, and that they were of each other's species. They were very nature identified. And so it would be really easy for Colette to reject sort of this embodiment when she wants to become an intellectual. But she doesn't. She wholeheartedly reclaims bodies, the natural world, and she says, okay, if I'm an animal, if that's how you're going to view me, then I'm an animal. I'm going to take that and run with it. And this is against the backdrop of things like Gustave Flaubert saying, woman is a vulgar animal from whom man has created a too beautiful ideal. I mean, very problematic. But what she does is the minute that she gets free of Willy and divorces him, she conducts her own publicity campaign. She has a series of postcards that she releases where she is nude, sprawled along the back of a tiger skin. So she says, you know, you saw me before in these postcards where I was compared to a dog. Now here's the feline, you know, here's the tiger that's roaring, and this is me now. With the short hair and the gamine style that she pioneered then, in this era of empowerment, you would think that she would be all about flappers, right? Look at these young women cutting their hair just like she had cut her hair 20 years before it was fashionable. Look at these young women wearing this, you know, straighter line that makes them look youthful in their clothing, shorter hems. She hates it. And I was very surprised to discover this. She dislikes it. She wrote a series of articles for Vogue in the 1920s, Vogue magazine, where she says that everyone dressed en gamine, flappers now, they look ridiculous. They look dumpy. And she says that she particularly objects to them binding down their breasts with a rubber shaper. She says, what matter if it reduces the shape of the female body to the contour of a cylinder? Sausage you must be, sausage you shall be. Harsh. I noticed that she's referring to the women who are conforming to this fashion as consumables. You're food for who? You're giving yourself up. You're, you know, contorting yourself into this shape, and you're being consumed. She also notes that men of this time are lacing their waists to create a more hourglass shape. So she feels like the gender roles have switched, and she objects to this. She also calls the binding down of breasts an elastic hair shirt. So there's this reference to the hair shirt of the mortification of the body in traditional Catholicism of the Middle Ages, this rejection of the body, somatophobia. And that really is her objection. It would be easy for her to, or for us to pin down someone who pioneered gamine style as someone who would automatically approve of flappers and view them as empowered. What she saw instead was that the city of Paris was being transformed in the 1920s by the scopic regime of 1920s art, 1920s films, flat media, harsher. When things were knocked down in Paris in the 1920s, right, then there would be this more modernist style coming in. She viewed this as a tragedy. She thought that Paris was losing a lot of its unique, the curves of like the early 1900s, Belle Époque, and late 1800s. And she viewed this as too much masculinity, too much machine, too much modernism, and that women were being forced by this zeitgeist to artificially flatten themselves. She viewed this as unhealthy. And so calling them greyhounds really drives home, I think, Colette's independence of thought, that we cannot assume that because she cut her hair and wore makeup that she viewed herself as unnatural. She actually viewed herself as fully embodied. She viewed herself as freeing her body to experience things, for example, by cutting her hair. And she viewed men, I think, after really, she viewed male fashion designers with a lot of skepticism, that they would ask women to narrow themselves, to restrict themselves, to diet, to stop eating. She had a hard time with that. And so, yeah, essentially, the rest of my chapter talks a lot about how culturally feline-coded traits continue to be problematic in today's society. We still, I feel, live with a little bit of a legacy about visible makeup that's very Victorian. Colette viewed it as self-expression, and she viewed women who cultivated their appearance for themselves as empowered, and she viewed following the fad of the moment as disempowered, and she communicated this via animal metaphors at a time when animality was associated with the debased feminine or natural world. And to conclude, I think it's really telling that when she meets Josephine Baker, and they become good friends eventually, she calls her a panther. She says, "You are the panther with the most beautiful golden claws." I'm assuming that Josephine's nails were painted. And, you know, I think it's really easy to view that as semi-problematic, like, oh, she's calling her an exotic animal. But to Colette, given this context, that was the highest praise. You are a large feline predator. You are embodied. You are empowered. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's move, because I can see time is running very fast. And I would like to move to Kathy Portuguese. If you're online, can we speak a little bit about Françoise Gillot before and after Picasso, which is the title of your chapter, chapter 6. And I think you knew her, so your contribution here is also very personal.
Thank you. Thank you so much again, Sylvie, for the privilege of participating in this wonderful project. I want also again to thank my dear friends and former fellow graduate students, Myrna Rochester and Mary Test. It was with them that I came to know Françoise Gillot, thanks to our connection with Dominique de Santi, who was an old friend and comrade of Françoise. Met her first in New York when Mary and Myrna and our colleague Patricia DeMeo were co-editing a Festschrift in honor of Dominique de Santi, the illustrious writer and journalist. And Françoise had been asked to contribute some sketches or other drawings that could be used as part of the Festschrift. And it was my honor and responsibility to meet with her, first on the west side of New York City, when I was invited to her atelier, which you can imagine was an extraordinary experience, walking in and seeing the history of art on the walls. She showed me a number of pieces. We chose together what we could use that she would contribute for the book in progress. After that, I met with her again in Montparnasse, in her studio there. So had also the opportunity to speak with her more personally about her experience. And in the chapter, I tried to give something of an overview of her as an artist, struggling from the very beginning with her own autonomy. She knew at age 5 that she wanted to be an artist. She met Picasso when he was 40 years older and already most established in the world. You can imagine, and I do talk about their relationship, what was important and what was extremely difficult. She began already having to assert herself against her father, who wanted her to be a lawyer. And thanks to support from her own grandmother, she was able to continue with her own art against great odds. For all that she benefited from being with Picasso, they had 2 children together, Paloma and Claude Picasso. She also was the only one of Picasso's many mistresses and wives who eventually left him after 10 years. So she spent 10 years with sharing his life. She died at age almost 102, just as I was finishing this chapter. And I would just want to add that among the precious gifts of getting to know her and be familiar with her art, it is a particular pleasure to be able to share with you that after having been virtually banished from France when Picasso was not accepting her as her own artist and took revenge on her leaving him, now for the first time ever, the Musée Picasso has an exhibition devoted to the work of Françoise Gillot, not seen through Picasso's eyes, but her own work through her own eyes, in room 17, of the Musée Picasso. This will be up for the coming year. It is temporary, but it will be up for that period, and I would like to encourage everyone to see it. I have not yet, but will hope to do so myself. And again, thank you for the great pleasure and honor of participating.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Sorry for rushing you. Moving to Catherine Montfort, who wrote on Irène Nemirovsky's Le Bal. This is the only contribution on a film in the entire book. Catherine, are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I wanted to tell you first why I chose Nemirovsky. I was teaching a women's course, and I wanted a book that was short and good writing. My students had read Liaison Dangereuse, Madame Bovary, and I thought they need something short to end up the quarter. So I looked for a book. I went to the library in Paris. I forgot which one it was, and I looked around and I found Le Bal by Nemirovsky. I glanced at it and I thought, yeah, that's it. I fell in love with Nemirovsky. So I did some research on her and got all the books she published. Now with the 2-volume published recently on her works, it's 3,000 pages of writing that she did. So Nemirovsky is somebody special, like all the other women, of course, but she died in 1942 as she was sent to a concentration camp. So her writing time was pretty short, but she was born in 1903 in Ukraine. And it's amazing, I found that there are more Ukrainian Russian writers there that keep popping up. I think Delaunay is also born in Ukraine. And they lived lavishly. They were a Jewish family. Her father was a banker. And they went to Biarritz. They went to the Côte d'Azur. They had she had an easy life when she was brought up. But there's a big but, because there is the Bolshevik Revolution and they had to flee. So not only she was raised in a well-to-do family, but she had to suffer flying to from Moscow to St. Petersburg, then to Sweden, first Finland, then Sweden, and finally she got in Paris in 1918 at the age of 16, 17. And there, this is when she joins Dora Shafik, because she went to the Sorbonne, but contrary to Shafik, she wasn't really a serious student. Well, she wanted to take courses in American literature. She loved French. Her mother spoke French to her. Her mother didn't take care of her, but gave her a French governess who spoke French. So she chose French as her writing for her writing, whatever she did. She wrote at the very beginning a few Russian poems, but basically that was not her calling. So she found herself in 1918, went to the Sorbonne, and her life at that time, for somebody who was so serious and then who died in tragic ways, she had partied a lot. She went to party and dance, and I feel good about it, because that's about the only time in her life that she really had a good time. She started writing in 1928, 29, and that's when she became famous. She wrote a book called David Golder, who everybody thought was written by a man, and much admired, and which was also from page to the title of my essays from page to screen, because Le Bal had a screen version. David Golder also had a screen version, and she became famous overnight. And she started writing. So she basically had 3 obstacles in her life. First, she was a woman. And if you see, there are not that many women writers. Well, there's Colette. But all the women writers who are going to be famous are after the war, like Simone de Beauvoir, writing La Vérité, etc. So she stands out as kind of a unique person, Russian or Ukrainian, I should say, to be more precise. And so in Le Bal, what is it? What did she decide to do. She decided to paint a family, a Jewish family, a rich family, who wants to give a ball to be acknowledged, to be viewed better by the high society in Paris, but they are not really very nice people. She writes invitations, and the three characters, there's a father who is a banker, okay, is okay. The mother, and that's going to be important, the mother is, oh, I don't know how to say it nicely, maybe bitch, B-I-T-C-H, I don't know, because she thinks only of herself, of her looks, of her clothing, or the parties she gives, and she doesn't pay any attention to her daughter. So the daughter, so one of the themes of the books that Nemirovsky is going to write in the next 10 years are really distorted by her vision of what a woman is supposed to be. She can't stand her mother, she hates her mother, she writes books, Le Vin de la Solitude, Jezabel, and even Le Bal, where to punish her mother, not to allow her to attend the ball. I mean, they are wanting to do a ball in their house. She doesn't want her daughter to be there at all, because in a way she's afraid of the comparison. She's an older woman. Her daughter is seen as she's jealous basically of her daughter. She dresses her with socks, and she's 15 years old, and she still worn, her hair like a little girl, and so she tries to chastise her mother. So the mother, the father, the daughter. Eventually, the daughter throws all the invitation in the river being the Seine, and so none of the invited people show up since they didn't receive the invitation. So the daughter, in a way, take a revenge on her mother by making her so sad because her party is not working. Let's see, what do I want to tell you? Yeah, so that was made in I shouldn't forget the title, From Page to Screen. That was made into a film. At the time where the film was becoming the cinéma chantant, that means there were dialogues, but there were music, and coming out, as a new art form. And she loved the film, which was done by William Thiel, Thiele, I think that's the way to pronounce it, Thiel. But in the long run, what I show in my paper is that her vision and Thiel's vision are really different. She is from a family, dysfunctional family. She hates her mother, and it's kind of tragic. While Thiel changes it all. Add a passage at the beginning where they have a nice family dinner, they go out to the park, to the Tuileries for a walk, and at the end he adds that they reconcile, and it's a ever lasting good relationship. So it's kind of interesting to contrast the book and the film, because they are really very different. I'm not so sure what I could add to that. Yes, what I should say is that since she died in 1942, though she tried to write until the end of her life, because she didn't work in the resistance, she went to the small town. Eventually, she had to wear the Jewish star, but she was caught up and sent to concentration camp. But she still wrote. She wrote until the last, and she said to her editor, I think that the last few books I wrote won't be published in my lifetime. And she was pretty much right. But she kept on writing, and she was... So from 1942 to 2009, when Suite Française was written, she disappeared from... nobody mentioned her. She was completely... There were a couple of her novels or short stories published, but basically she was forgotten. Then, I didn't say that, but her daughters, were given her last manuscript. And they thought it was a diary, so they they were traumatized to see their mother sent to camp. But so they carried it with them, they had to hide from the Germans who were chasing them from north of France to the south of France. And eventually they looked at the book and they realized it was a novel. And the novel is Suite Française. Now, there is a film now on Suite Française. I need to watch it again. But basically, altogether, she had 3 films done out of her novels, and I think that's it.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm cutting this short. I have to leave room for, and we're beyond. I think we're past time, so we're not going to have time for questions. Sorry. And not for me, but that's okay. Read the book. Janet Flanner is very much a part of this, but she's here in spirit. Because she worked here, actually. I think some of her books are in this collection, so we'll just stop here. Any questions? Probably not.
I'm so sorry that we won't hear about Miss Flanner tonight. To cut this short, I'm sure many in the audience would agree with me that I could sit and listen to this for hours and hours, but unfortunately, libraries do need to close at some point, so we'll cut it short here. But thank you so much, both our in-person panelists and our lovely, lovely Zoom panelists, for such a rich, invigorating, exciting evening of discussion. I've just learned so much. I feel so artistically inspired, and I hope everyone else does as well. So thank you all for joining us for this very special evening. I'd just like to say that copies of Impressions for Paris, they're not for sale tonight, but Vernon Press is offering a 20% discount. A 30% discount until this Sunday, I believe, if you purchase it with the code IMParis30. So please go purchase this lovely, lovely book, I Am Paris 30. Thank you so much again for joining us, and I hope to see you soon. Have a lovely evening.